This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Dana Skaggs for the first time. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. What about yourself?
It's a great morning in New Hampshire, in the great state of New Hampshire. That's where we're broadcasting from, and this is going to actually be episode 914 of the podcast, and we're also on the Newsly platform. We're a featured podcast there. So if you use coupon code GHOST, you can receive 1 month free premium subscription. You can listen there. They do an audio conversion of the podcast. And if you use coupon code GHOST, you get 1 month of premium subscription. And yeah, we're just happy to be here. We've been around since 2016. We like to talk to all types of people. And for those of you just listening, we have a website up there, https danaskaggs.com. And we always encourage people to click on that. It will be clickable when we're fully published. So maybe at the beginning, like danaskaggs.com, if people go there, what do they find?
Well, recently I've expanded my business. So if you go to danaskaggs.com, what they'll find right now is a lot of information about my online boundaries courses. There's also a quiz they can take because they might be thinking, I don't know if do I have boundary issues? And I mention boundaries because I'm known as the boundaries queen. And so they're thinking, I don't know if I have boundary issues, and they're very, very prevalent. And because I'm a psychotherapist, I'll tell you more about that here in just a minute, how that kind of played into all of this. But you can take a quiz on the website and you'll get a score and you'll get some feedback. And there's a bunch of tidbits that I offer, helpful tidbits. And there's also, I'm getting ready to go live with some self-study courses. One is a smaller one and one is a larger one for maybe someone that doesn't want to participate in a group. And then I'm going to be offering group courses that are 8 weeks long, where I'm going to be meeting with someone once a week. The group probably at the maximum about 7. So we can have that time to really connect and get to know each other. And I've got video modules and teaching all about boundaries and helping them apply it. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I think that's a good type of place to start from, because that the whole topic of boundaries and why do they matter. I think some people, they don't realize that being a musician, we run into it all the time. We do because what happens with music is like sometimes our fans think we're talking to them directly. And so sometimes we show up at a concert and person like doesn't have a boundaries, and they end up in the green room, and you're like, well, how'd they get here? And they're like,
Yeah, like,
and they just
well,
think they have a right to be there. And then you're like, okay. But they're like, are you not like thinking like when they think you're talking directly to them? So you have to be concerned about the safety issues, because sometimes people just don't know, or
mhm.
they come and approach you out of nowhere, and you're like, okay. It's like, yeah, it's not something you had to think about as much, but yeah, there's sometimes, a lot of artists I've talked to is like, wow, like some people they don't know what's appropriate.
Oh, that's a really good example. The name of my course is called the Freedom of No Formula, because like the example that you're giving, and I could give a whole lot more. A lot of people feel uncomfortable just saying no.
Hmm.
And once you have really good understanding of how boundaries work, you're comfortable. You don't have to get upset. You don't have to be confrontational. You don't have to be loud. And you can just say, no, this is not, let me take you out of the green room. This is another place for you to go. This is not an appropriate place. That when you are very comfortable with your boundaries and you know what they are and you know how boundaries work, then you become very confident in yourself and very peaceful. And you feel like you can say no to any number of people in your life. And that's an excellent way of setting those boundaries with people, with whoever you're interacting with.
Yeah, I think even for yourself, like people don't set their own boundaries. Like sometimes, again, another example as a musician is like sometimes we were such an open book that we can kind of damage it ourselves, like because it's like you put so much out there, and then you're like, oh, I should have thought about the result, and if I'm not comfortable with it, right? So sometimes artists will say so much about themselves and so much of them in the song that then they don't realize the impact of it in their regular life. They do it for the art, and then they don't consider like, okay, well, people are thinking that's you, and maybe it's you,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe it's not you. Maybe you were just telling a story. So then people like, you expose yourself, and are you comfortable? Some artists like, I'm totally comfortable with that. Other artists are like, oh, they didn't realize that they didn't set that boundary. And then they're kind of expected, if that becomes a hit, to repeat that all the time. And then it can be kind of damaging to themselves because they didn't set a boundary, and now there's an expectation in their work that they have to do it all the time.
Yeah. And I really like the fact that you're talking about what the artist is thinking and feeling versus what other people are thinking, feeling, and expecting. Because as an artist, you can say whatever you choose to say or not choose to say. What you don't have any control over is how someone else is going to think or feel about it. And so that is not you. Let me back up and say something that helps me to train people about boundaries is I use a yard analogy. So if you could imagine a typical suburban neighborhood and you've got yards, and let's just imagine there's fencing in between the yards. Well, in your yard are your thoughts, your feelings and opinions, and your actions, all of which you have a right to, and those belong to you to own and change as you want. What's in the other person's yard are their thoughts, their feelings and opinions, and their actions, which we have no control over, nor do we have a responsibility for. And so sometimes we get mixed up in that, and we're not owning what's in our own yard, and we're overly concerned about what's in someone else's yard, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. Like, let me give you an example back to what you said. Let's say if you had a musician who really felt strongly about, he or she wanted to expose themselves and be vulnerable in a song. They just really felt that vibe. They just needed to do that. They were feeling that energy. Well, they did that, and then they get a certain reaction from other people. Well, that's interesting, but that reaction does not belong to the artist. That reaction belongs to the listener. The artist did not create that reaction, even though the person listened to the artist and reacted a certain kind of way. That reaction comes from the listener and their background. The artist isn't responsible for that. And so understanding that line helps people to set boundaries better.
Yeah, because I like a lot of people have said is like, if you're a lot of creative people, I've talked to authors and film directors and musicians, and they're like, how people interpret my work, that's kind of like that's how they see it. Like I might have had a vision, but it happens all the time. People, misinterpret lyrics. They think you said X and it's Y.
Right.
Like they heard something else, and that's what they hear. That's what they feel, and that's how they see it. And it's kind of like, and a lot of artists will say, well, my fans kind of own the song. After I write it, they own it because that's how they feel it. So I can't really worry about it. And when you're in a job, like sometimes software developers, they get personal. They take it personal when somebody says 20 years later, well, this code's terrible. And then you're like, well, that's what it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's like now the technology shifted. It's like, I don't own it. The company owns it. It was like work for hire. It's like, so you don't take it personal. Somebody has to replace it because everything wears out. And but some people, they take it personal because they kind of feel that that's them. That what they worked on is actually an extension of themselves. And then like, well, yeah, you can feel that way, but then it can cause damage if you don't really learn how to separate it.
Oh, that's 100%. You are absolutely true on that. There's a quote from Don Miguel Ruiz that says, there's a tremendous amount of freedom that comes when we take nothing personally. And we don't have to take anything personally. Someone else has a right to their thoughts and feelings. That has nothing to do with us. And someone else has a right not to like us. Someone else has a right to not like our work. Someone else has a right to not like this or that or what we did. They have a right to that. But that doesn't take away from what we wanted to do, what we started out to do, and the quality of the work that we put out there, because everybody's different. And you can go to downtown, you go to the mall or whatever and pull 10 random strangers and have them listen to a song or show them a work of art. And you're going to get 10 different responses. So the question is, who's right?
Yeah. That's always the big problem when I always work with artists as a producer is a lot of times people are scared to act. They're fearful of what people are going to like. Right. And so they don't want to present something because they think they don't know how people are going to take it, or they think they're going to take it negatively. And what I find a lot of times is that piece they're so scared of is actually one of the best pieces they've ever done. And it's trying to get them to feel more comfortable showing that instead of trying to do something that they're comparing themselves to somebody else.
Oh,
And so
that's
they're
huge.
yeah, so they're not putting out their original work. They're trying to kind of clone somebody else's work. And I said, well, your original is better than this clone because it's you. And
Mm-hmm.
you're not this other person. They're always going to be them. So you're never going to equal them exactly. So you're maybe going to be different, but if you want to be uniquely yourself, just be yourself.
Yes.
And that's nothing, nobody else has that. Your voice, every human being's voice is different. And
Yes.
so the way you approach it, that's you. And that's what's beautiful as a producer. I try to get people to realize making the best version of yourself, that's like the core.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I try to do. And other people say, well, no, I want to clone. Okay, fine, clone. That's what you want to do. But if I want people want to be self-expressive and they want to be their own person. The reason why are they singing? Why are they doing this? Because they want to get it out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a matter of like how comfortable are you? And to me, it's like it's always hard to do something like that. Like if you're trying to do something unique, people, like you said, people are gonna hate it. They're
Mm-hmm.
gonna be haters. People like it, and there could be
Yes.
90% of people hate it. You know, but then 10% don't, and then you get opportunities. If you never put it out there, you never get the opportunity.
That's
So
right. I mean, I think just like you're saying, in order for someone to be authentic, in order for someone to be honoring of their unique self, they've got to be able to have the strength and the boundaries to put it out there, realizing that they're honoring themselves and they're putting it out there. But yes, there are going to be people that don't like it. And I work this with my patients a lot. So being a psychotherapist, I've been one for 15 years. And that's one of the things that we address a lot of the time. They're scared to death. Oh my gosh, if I say this, if I do this, if I put this out there, then someone is not going to like it. And I look at them straight in the face and I said, "You're right. Someone is not going to like it." And so what?
yeah,
Somebody, how they respond is not your business. Your business is what's in your yard, and honoring that and really putting that out there in the best way that you can. Yes, there are going to be people that don't like what you do, that don't like what you say, that criticize you, that judge you. Yes, those people are going to be out there. They're always going to be out there. So what? When you have boundaries, you can let that stay in their yard, and you give them the right to have their own opinions, and you go forward with your own opinions, because you have just as much right to go out there. And if somebody else doesn't like it, okay, they don't like it. And
yeah. Well, it's like the idea of like staying in the moment because I think some people are always competing with the past, like so they're looking to like, okay, my parents told me this, my grandparents told me that, my spiritual leader told me this, and then like thinking about all the stuff that happened yesterday or day before or whatever, and then
mm-hmm,
there's like having a hard time actually processing the moment because they keep on comparing it to the past, which I like find you can have a lesson learned, but if you keep on not being able to actually like, this is what I deal with people who are, kind of like a musician that keeps on starting and stopping and they keep on like trying to correct and trying to be perfect. And I'm just let it flow.
mm-hmm,
Just kind of like trust yourself and let it flow. And they're so scared of like, oh, they're gonna make a mistake. But the whole point in music is the happy accident has been a big part of like great pieces of art
yeah,
because people kind of just let it go. And it's like, oh yeah, I did a bad key change. I did a bad timing change. I actually said something a little off. It wasn't perfect, but like when they try to correct it, you end up finding that the fourth take is better than the 99th, even if it has errors. Because
yeah.
like the errors actually are okay because that's what makes art. The fact that it's not perfect, the imperfections are part of the art.
That's it. That's it. The imperfections, and that just the acceptance of who we are as individuals, and the acceptance of our walk, our journeys. I mean, I've walked with so many people, and we're all on different paths. And not only that, but each path has a different leg. You can be on this leg of your journey that's going to be very different from the leg you're on next month or next year or the year after that. And what I'm hearing you say, and it's very important, is just be very honoring of that. Whatever you're going through, whatever you're feeling, whatever's in your life, just be honoring of that. And what is a mistake really?
Yeah.
What is that? What does it mean to fail? I don't even really know what that means, really.
Yeah, because it's like there's like Victor Wooten is a famous bass player. He was having a master class, and he basically went through multiple scales with the same pattern. It's like you could say I'm hitting wrong notes, and I'm crossing scales, but my intention as an artist, I've got this pattern, and I can make it work no matter what the notes are.
Hmm.
So that shows you like there are no. His whole point to the class was there are no bad notes. There,
Yes.
I can actually get it to work, and how I can kind of respond and play off what is a perceived mistake, as a musician, is like not having to stop the whole concert because I hit the wrong note. Is I kind of am able to rebound off of it. I'm able to kind of go to another direction, and yeah, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm gonna kind of just recover from it, or actually go to a different point. And it's like, oh yeah, so that's how do you do that? Well, it's kind of like living life. You don't know what's coming. It's how you respond to it. Are you going to totally like not know what to do and it freeze up, or are you going to learn how to go kind of with the flow and react to it in a positive way?
Yeah, 100%. And added to that is that all of us we all know that we're faulty. We all know that. And so we end up being attracted to faults in other people because we resonate with that. We're like, oh my gosh, thank God I'm not the only one. When we see someone else make whatever we call a mistake, I'm putting mistakes in quotes because when we see them making a mistake, we're like, oh, you're my person. You're my person because thank God I'm not the only one making mistakes. And so then you resonate with that person. You feel connected to them because you're like, okay, we're just human beings on this path, and we can connect together. That's one of the things that I put on my podcast, Phoenix and Flame. It's all about just realizing, let's be real. Let's acknowledge what our faults are. Let's acknowledge when we make mistakes and kind of pull together as a community. So it's like, what is a mistake really?
But it's the whole idea of having a live podcast versus a recorded, heavily edited podcast.
Yeah,
And when I first started in 2016, I tried with edited, and I said, well, if I keep on doing these edited ones, I can't do as many podcasts.
that's true.
I can't talk to many people. So you thought, you know what? I'm going to live with, moments where there could be mistakes or something like a glitch, and just live with it and say, I want to be able to reach more, talk to more people.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like the idea of having a real conversation. And if I get it to a point where people can go and say, hey, I don't want that in the podcast, I want to edit it. And I said, no, I don't want to spend my time editing. Because I made a choice. It's like, I don't want to, I found it like it's too much time going and getting approvals. Or do you approve this? Do you approve that? And I was like, I don't want to go down that road. Let's be real and just talk.
Yep.
And then people are like, so I've run into some people that don't want to be guests because they do want to control. They want to control like every moment, and they're like, okay, well, I don't do it that way, so I guess we're not going to work together.
Move on.
I don't do it that way, so it's like, okay. It's like,
I mean, life is messy, right?
Yeah.
Life is messy. And I think you talk about artists and people that are being creative. That is representing real life. I think people, when they hear a song or when they look at a sculpture, they look at a painting, they read a book, they're wanting to resonate with something that they feel in their soul. And we all know that life is messy. And when we can accept that and just go forward with that and honor that, then the fear goes way, way down. I did want to.
I mean, my whole thing is like, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I want to change topics a little bit because I want to bring up something. So if you wanted to say something about what we just said, you go on ahead and I'll just switch over in a minute.
No, you can. I'll bring it up after your point.
Okay. Sometimes we have people in our life who are toxic, and the toxic people, if we don't know how to set healthy boundaries with them, they can stall our creativity. They can cause it to dry up. They can cause it to curl up inside of us because we are so wrapped up in trying to deal with someone who's toxic. A toxic person in your life can be anybody. It can be a family member. It can be a friend. It can be your spouse. It can be an adult child. It can be a coworker. It can be anybody. But when you have someone like that in your life, especially if someone has a lot of toxic traits like gaslighting, manipulating, emotional and verbal abuse, this kind of thing, it makes it very difficult to be open and free with your creativity, because you get so much of your energy, your creative energy gets drained out in trying to deal with this toxic person. And one of the reasons why I know as much as I know about boundaries is because I had to do this in a relationship with my mother, which was a very hard thing to do. And she struggled, and she still does, with several pretty significant emotional issues that were, I was going to say, they're pretty severe. And it created a lot of inconsistency where I can have some really great memories, things that I remember her helping me tie my shoes. I remember her helping me to color and taking me to swimming lessons. And I have these wonderful, warm, fuzzy memories. And I also have some other memories that are bad. Things being, called names, yelled at, things thrown at me, a lot of manipulative stuff, really in an environment that I felt responsible, was kind of blamed for her emotions. If she wasn't happy, it was my fault. I was supposed to fix it and this kind of stuff. So going through that, decades of that, I had to learn boundaries or I was going to be annihilated. And I know that if I didn't set healthy boundaries in that relationship, I could not have been able to accomplish the things that I've done. And I've run across like patients and also, newer patients that are coming in as well, people that have a lot of guilt from these relationships and they don't know how to set the boundaries. And so because they feel so guilty, they're always sucked in to that manipulation and that abuse. And because they're doing that, their energy that they should be spending on creative things gets sucked over to this toxic relationship, and it's not good. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about helping people learn boundaries so they can go forward in life and be their full self.
Yeah, you don't want to be stuck in that kind of codependency. And a lot of people, they feel obligation to their parents or their grandparents or family members, and they'll stay and they'll say, well, they'll have this like, well, I can split up with a significant other, but I can't split up with my grandma or my grandparents or my mother, my dad, because that's family. But if they're toxic and they're hurting you and they're stopping you, I ran into that with my family. I had into a situation where, I had a parent that was being kind of toxic, and it was causing me to spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, and it wasn't productive.
Mm-mm.
And I was like, and then other people in my family were putting pressure on me. So, you have to come to the Christmas dinner. You have to come to Thanksgiving. I'm like, I don't feel good about it, and I did it when I had, when I was younger and I felt like I was obligated. But now I'm 55. It's like, I don't feel like I want to do that. I want to bring my daughter into that. I just didn't want to do it. And
That's
I
it.
explained to people, it's like, it doesn't help me. And I don't think it's going to help my daughter either. So, so I made a decision, and I got to be the bad guy. Go, what's he doing? What's he doing? But it's like, I can't worry about that because
No.
there's other things I was able to kind of focus on, like what we're doing right now.
Well, that's what my point is. But you were able to do that. And it's like, if it's someone who's a significant other, like a girlfriend, boyfriend, whoever, and you can walk away. But that's why boundaries are so important, and people in your life that you cannot physically necessarily walk away from in that regard. They're always going to be related to you, but you can have healthier relationship if you set boundaries when you know that you have the right, like you said, if you want to go to that Christmas party, you have the right to say yes, and you have the right to say no. And now what's going to happen when you say no, because I have a doghouse in my backyard that people try to throw me in all the time. I mean, I'm telling you right now, if you set and defend your boundaries, there's always going to be people who are going to be trying to make you feel bad, who are going to call you names, who are going to judge you, and who are going to criticize you. That's going to happen. So just when that happens, don't be shocked. It happened to you. It happened to me. When you set those boundaries, there's going to be people around that say, shame on you. You should be doing this. You should be doing that. Well, They have a right to their opinion. Okay, you can think that, but you know what? My opinion is different and I'm not coming. And that's why when my course is called the Freedom of No formula. It's like
Mhm.
my answer is no. I'm not coming or I'm not doing that. And then how they feel about it, they feel about it. And that's a boundary.
Yeah. It's hard for some people to make that decision, because I had my like a brother. He said, "Well, I wish I could do that." I said, "Well, you don't wish about it, just do it."
Mhm.
It's harder than it seems because I run into it all the time. We're creatives. They have these like ceilings, and it's like their own ceiling. Like they prevent themselves from getting to the next step because they're in this like loop and they
Mhm.
can't get out of the loop. And I'm like, why? It's hard. I guess each person has to know when they're ready to actually pull make that decision. And a
Yeah.
lot of times maybe they need to talk to somebody like you. They need to go to a therapist, to go to the life coach or whatever. They can't do it on their own, or they haven't been
Mhm.
able to figure out how to do it on their own. So I think that's like where people like yourself come in, where they give people strategies on how to actually start that journey.
Oh, you have a very, very good point. Really setting and defending boundaries is simple to understand, but it's not easy to do. Because let me give you an example. Like I would imagine that probably so far today you haven't put much thought about into your throat. Thinking about your throat a whole lot. Have you thought about your throat a lot today? I mean, that's not something we
Not
go
really.
around thinking about. No. I mean, why would we? But if you had strep throat, you would think about it a lot. You would think about your throat several
Mhm.
times a day if you had strep throat. Why? Because it's in pain. So if you're in a relationship with healthy people, you don't really think about boundaries because they're naturally being set. Other people that are healthy naturally perceive your boundaries, they naturally respect your boundaries, and you do the same thing with the other person. But if you're in a relationship with someone who's dysfunctional or toxic in some kind of way, it causes pain in the relationship, and then you're aware of it. And so when you're having to think about setting and defending boundaries, it's usually with people who are dysfunctional, and that is not easy to do. So reaching out, like you said, to someone like me, at the very minimum, educating yourself about what are boundaries and how do they work exactly? So at least when you go into these relationships, you're aware when someone is crossing the line, and you're aware when you are
Mhm.
crossing the line. Like that's what codependency is. When you're crossing the line into someone else's yard and you're all worried about what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and oh my gosh, you don't want them to be upset and all this kind of stuff. You're in somebody else's yard. That's codependency. So learning about how it all works so you can see when you're kind of tilting sideways is humongous.
Yeah, it's interesting because like there's another thing that I was looking at some of your bulleted questions, and this idea of like intrusive thoughts bullying yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see, and sometimes those thoughts might have come because like you had a mom or dad or a grandparent that was like telling you what they said was the truth, but it was a belief. So they said like you're never going to amount to anything,
Mm-hmm.
and you took that to be a truth, right? But it's really just a belief. That's not a truth.
Right.
Like that's
No.
just something that they said, and you took it to be true, but it's not. And then it
Mm-hmm.
keeps on showing up every time you try to do something. You're in this loop. It's like, well, I'm not good enough.
Yes.
I'm not because they told me I was never going to amount to nothing or I'm not going to get anywhere. And that I think those intrusive thoughts, I run into that with creative people all the time. Is like they get this thing stopping them.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, what? Why is that stopping you? You'd be surprised. Like these people that seem so like wow to get on stage and they're like, wow, how do they have that? But off stage, they have all these
Mm.
issues where they're not confident at all.
The imposter syndrome and all
Yeah,
that creeps
yeah,
in. Yeah.
yeah. So the second they go on stage, you're like, wow, they're so confident, and then they're off stage and they're like, wow, it's like this person doesn't even seem like the same person.
Right.
It's like they see it like a totally different person. It's like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
it is like how do you kind of level out a little bit?
Yeah, because
But
see, when they're on stage, I would imagine on some level they're free from the intrusive thoughts because they're in the moment. They're playing their music, they're doing their thing, they're they're looking at the audience, they're feeding off the energy from the audience. It's sort of like a safe space. But when they step off the stage and they put the instruments down and they walk away from the microphone, they walk away from all the fans, then they're standing there. And guess what's waiting for them? Their own thoughts and their own feelings.
Mm.
They were able to set those aside and go up on stage in this kind of sphere of safety. But then when they step down, there their feelings are again. But you're talking about the intrusive thoughts where somebody in their past has told them, you're not worth anything, you're this, you're that, or you're never going to do. That's a boundary issue too, because everyone's entitled to their opinion, but you have to at some point figure out what's in your yard. What do you think? What are your thoughts? What, do you think you're not going to amount to anything? And based on what? Where does that belief come from? And kind of doing a challenge that.
Yeah, because it can cause you to do this kind of like perfectionism to the extent that it becomes like a little bit dangerous to yourself, because like you're just kind of just doing this repetitive thing that's beyond like you go and do 1,000 versions of a solo and the first 5 are really good. Like, why did you do 1,000? Because you didn't think they were good enough. And why didn't you think they were good enough? Because you still had this thing in your head telling you you're not good enough. So you got to go overdo it, and like you're overdoing it. It's like, why are you doing that?
Mm-hmm.
And people don't see it, but when you work with some people, you're like, wow, it's like, why are they so? And sometimes it seems like it's too extreme. And he's like, okay, well, that's kind of who they are, and you have to kind of learn how to handle it.
Yes. But it's also trying to figure out, like you're pointing out, what are those thoughts in their head? Is there something that's driving them? And the boundaries is figuring out how much of that belongs to you, and how much, if you're the person that's experiencing this angst, how much of this is yours and how much actually is somebody else's.
Mm-hmm.
You have to figure that out. Like when someone comes to see me for therapy and they come in the door and they start talking about all this stuff that's bothering them and how their life's just falling apart and their marriage is falling apart and they're falling apart at work and all this is going on. The first thing we've got to figure out is, okay, here's all the stuff. Let's lay out all the pieces. How much of this actually belongs to you?
Mm-hmm.
And how much actually belongs to someone else? Because we cannot control what someone else wants to think, feel, and do, but we do get to control and change our own thoughts, our own feelings, and our own actions. And that's where we want to spend our time, is in our own yard, and get out of everybody else's.
Yeah, because if you can kind of get yourself, like I'm a Buddhist and I chant and meditate, do breathing exercises, and I find that it kind of levels me out. Like if I start getting anxious or having any kind of anxiety, just taking that breathing exercise, kind of like Tai Chi, but it's like you sit there and you chant. I'm a Nichiren Daishonin Buddhist, and we have these chants that come from our practice, and it kind of like it controls our breathing and controls like the stress levels we have.
Yes.
And you find a way to kind of focus, and we have like things where we actually verbalize our intentions, right? So we have like, I want to feel good today, I want to do this thing, and we actually speak it out because we have this belief, like if we actually say it, we're going to make it more actualized, we're going to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And some people don't believe that because, well, that's what but I think like your brain is so powerful
Oh, yes.
that if you start to have more positivity, and we have this idea of like this positive energy brings positive energy and negative energy brings negative energy. That's just law of cause and effect. This is concept.
Yes.
And whether you believe that or not, but it's the idea, if you're always thinking you're pessimistic, then you kind of have a self-fulfilling prophecy. You think everything's going to go wrong, but if you start to believe that things can go right, then it seems you can actually start to make things happen in a more positive direction. And so I feel, not that you can control everybody, like you can't control what's going to happen, but you can do what you can control yourself to a certain extent.
Oh, yeah. And I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on when you are able to do your chanting and your breathing and you calm yourself down. Do you find that you are less vulnerable to negative people around you when you're calmer, when your breathing is calm?
Yeah, I think you start to look at things and you say, hey, that's not me, that's them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you let it kind of roll off. You don't have that kind of road rage Like if like if somebody comes at you aggressive, you don't come back at them aggressive. You
Hmm.
say, okay, they're feeling bad today. They're feeling upset. They're anxious. They're really kind of like, so you don't take it personal and say, hey, that's them.
That's it.
You know, and you figure out it's really kind of like the recovery. How do you recover from something that could be a bad situation? If you keep on escalating, know what somebody's going to do. Then the things go out of control, because if two people get out of control, then what are you going to get? Chaos. If you start to be more, it's like the thing about the Buddhist monk is they kind of let it roll off. It's like what they get it like, I'm just going to be peaceful. What you decide to do, if you decide not to be peaceful, that's up to you. But I believe that that's what my approach should be, because
That's exactly what you're talking about are boundaries, because you're saying, okay, whatever the other person decides to do, that's on them, that's in their yard. But in my yard, I am choosing to stay calm. And see, we are responsible for our emotions. That's our responsibility. Not only do we get to change these, but we are responsible for them. We need to own when we've done something that we don't really like so much or we would like to change. We need to own it and say, I did that and I'm going to change it. And so when we're able to calm ourselves down, we set that boundary. Because if we're, like you said, people going back and forth at each other, anger and anger getting back and forth, if we're upset, if we've lost control of our emotions, then we're not in a position of control or power. People like to think when they make themselves real big and bad that the louder they scream, the deeper their voice, the more they can cuss and carry on, that they look so huff and tough. At that point, they have lost control of themselves. They are not the one in control. If you are calm and you're using deep breathing and you have kept yourself calm, between those two individuals, the calmer one is the stronger one. The calmer one is the one that is actually in control, not the one who is screaming and hollering and carrying on, because that person has lost control of their emotions.
Yeah, I kind of call it like a social judo. Like you let it, they come at you, and you're more like, you're not offensive. You're just like, learn how to be defensive in terms of like, I'm not gonna do an outward action that's gonna cause escalation. I'm
Right.
gonna take your energy and kind of turn it into positivity. That's the way I look at, like, as a songwriter. If I feel upset, I'll go write a song and talk about what I felt like. If I feel sad, I'll go write a song. If I feel happy, I'll write a song, because I like to take those emotions and turn them into art. And when I
Mm-hmm.
find creative people, they found a way to take those things and turn it into a positive, like a piece of art.
Yes.
Yeah, and I find that's like the art therapy. Like a lot of us find it where it's cathartic to
Mm-hmm.
be a musician. Whether or not I make any money off of the song isn't the point. The point is, I did the song because I'm trying to work through something. If
Yes.
it happens to work out and other people vibe on it, but I still benefited from that exercise or that project because I was working through something.
Yes.
And that's how I look at it. And I don't feel like a lot of things you go, oh, you have all these failures. They're not failures. Every one of these pieces helped me get through something.
Yeah.
And some of them commercially did okay and some of them didn't. But it's like, that wasn't the point.
That's it. That's exactly right. I mean, that's an excellent way of putting it. You're processing your emotions. You're not getting stuck with them. You're processing them through. When I have patients that are creative, I always ask them, I said, why don't you write a song about this? Or why don't you write a poem about this? Or why don't you draw a picture of what you're feeling or paint a picture of what you're feeling? Express it that way. And it's amazing how that does help, because we've got to face, feel, and process what's going on with us. Because if we don't, we're going to get stuck with it. It's going to be stuck inside our body. And it doesn't, sometimes we have a lot of gastrointestinal issues. You see people with a lot of
Yeah.
ulcerative colitis, IBS, GERD, fibromyalgia, all kinds of stuff, because things, and I'm not saying that emotions are the sole cause of these things, but they definitely make them worse when we don't talk about them. We think, okay, if I don't talk about it, it's just going to evaporate. Well, that's not how that works.
Yeah. Because you might have been told that it's like bad to talk about it. Like
Yes.
somebody could have told you in some practice, or somebody told you because of some social moray. 'Cause I was a sociology major, and it's like, oh, you're not supposed to reveal your anomie. You shouldn't reveal that because that makes you weak. You
No.
can't talk about it because that makes you weak, or that's not going to get you closer to this or closer to that. You got to suffer through it. And I'm
Hmm.
like, yeah, that's not. It's like, so I might have been taught, with those things as a young person, and I kind of rejected it. When I was in my teens, it's like, I don't like it, and I just like went off into something else because I didn't like what was being taught, and everybody was like, well, why don't you come into church anymore? I don't like it. I didn't like what was happening. I was like, I went to a different direction, and it was kind of like I was the bad guy again. But I was like, I don't feel it. I
Right.
don't feel what's going on. So I was always willing to kind of do something other than what was being done around me. And people were like, why? Why are you doing that? So, well, because it feels right to
For
not go
you.
this way.
Yeah. You had your own path and you were honoring that. There's so many people that struggle to do that because like you said, of people around them are doing different things and we compare so much. We compare our walk with someone else's walk and think I should be doing what they're doing. But according to whom? Who said that? We're
Yeah.
all on a very unique journey. Every one of us. We're all on a different path and they're all separate, they're all individual, and they're all unique.
Yeah. It's just very hard because, you sometimes you lose, people around you.
Yes.
Even when I'm a cancer survivor. I was age 27.
Oh, wow.
And I had all these young friends around me, and it seemed like they kind of peeled off because I started to realize they didn't want to think about the mortality, that issue I was going through, because
Mm.
you're under 30, and one of your friends is, I got a level 3, and I survived it. I'm 55, but it's like at the time I had some friends peel off and they just disappeared, and I had other people that they could handle it, but it's like, oh no, it's like they can't handle the idea that that could happen, and
Yeah.
to kind of seeing themselves in it, or they just, it was too painful for them. They couldn't handle it. And I was like, well, fine, that's where they go. But it was kind of like this moment where I realized also for me, there were things like I'm not going to be fearful of things I want to do. I'm going to go and, I traveled to Japan. I lived in Japan. I started being more expressive about what I wanted to do and had been scared about being upfront. And now, I'm doing music and actually being a podcaster. And the pre-cancer version of me, I was so fear I would never go on a mic. I would never be up
Wow.
front. I just became like a different person because it's like, why should I be scared of that?
Yep.
Once I survived it, I said, all these things I was scared of, why?
That's it.
I
That's it
shouldn't be
right
scared.
there.
Why
I
I
mean,
should
fear is huge. And you have so many people these days that talk about being anxious. I'm anxious, I'm anxious, everybody's anxious. But actually fear is the father of anxiety. So if we are anxious about something, technically we are afraid of something. So being able to identify what exactly we are afraid of so we can then challenge it and decide if should I be afraid of this? Why? Like you said, why am I afraid of this particular thing? And then we can kind of deconstruct it, break it down, and then reconstruct something else without the fear. That's a really, really big deal. Now, I wanted to add something to something you said earlier about kind of energies and resonating. I've had several guests on my podcast and interesting conversations about law of attraction and this kind of thing. And it is true that there's energy. I know you probably, especially being creative and people like us that have that, we kind of have a feel about people. You can walk in a room with someone and you just feel something. You don't know why. You can't put words to it, but you feel it, whether it's a really positive thing and you find yourself just kind of being drawn to them, or whether it feels like a icky darkness that you just kind of find yourself just kind of going like this, like you don't even want to stand next to them, and you don't really know what's going on, but you feel it in your soul. And I feel like we do give out, based on kind of what energy we're resonating on, whether it's positive because we're being grateful and we're proactive, we're solution focused and this kind of stuff, or if we're wrapped up in a bunch of pathology, because basically pathology attracts pathology, like dysfunction attracts dysfunction. I've seen it over and over and over again. I've seen it in my patients, how they will go out and dysfunctional people, like for example, a woman who has a lot of dysfunctional patterns, she will go out and I'm telling you, dysfunctional men are attracted to her like a magnet.
Mhm.
It's nuts, but healthy also attracts healthy. So when that same female starts to become strong and she starts to address her fears and confront her fears and accept herself, accept her faults, and just be more free and open and accepting of herself. And she goes out into the world and she's resonating on a higher energy, a better energy. Her vibration changes and she attracts healthy people. And the ones that are dysfunctional aren't really, they're not magnetized to her anymore. And it's very, very interesting to watch.
That's interesting because I'm a synthesist. So what that means is I deal with synthesizers that take waveforms like ramp waves, pulse waves, sine waves, cosine waves, all triangles, whatever. And I, as a musician, I create sounds, right? And I create frequencies. And then being in bands is like realizing what certain waveform frequencies do to audiences. Like when you build rhythms and you build melodies and you're using certain frequencies and certain tones, they actually can cause people to get very, hyped up, or they can get people to be kind of calm, or people feel in certain situations, people feel kind of like an anthem. They feel like good. They feel very joyous. And you
Mhm.
can see by the using these waveforms, because it's really interesting that the sound has an effect. And if
Yes.
once you start to know what the sounds can do, you can kind of have an effect on the audience with all the different frequencies that you're running. And it's like, wow, it's like you can actually kind of predict, like if I use these frequencies together with these beats, I'm going to get the crowd to be in this kind of state versus
Mhm.
this kind of state, like there's like a punk rock state versus more in like a love song anthem, and everybody's putting the candles out. Why does that happen? People get into the mosh pit, or people do this, or people do that, and you're like, wow, I can actually do that.
Yes, I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about. And I feel like individuals have those waves inside. I think, you have them in you and I have them in me. And I think you have people talk about auras and some people can see, they say they can see auras, and other people talk about feeling
Yeah, feeling it.
auras. I feel like everybody does have those. I have definitely feel them myself. Um, and I know I give them off around other people, but it's kind of like when you're functioning on a more positive level, and having healthy boundaries helps you to do that, because then you are owning and accepting what's in your yard, your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. You're not having to shift blame on anybody else, because you're like, I know I'm not perfect. I did this. If I had another opportunity, I won't do it again. And I want to apologize for what I did. I did this. And I feel like maybe you responded with some hurt because I said this to you. I own that, because I know I'm not perfect and I'm sorry. And we can say that. And that's a beautiful thing. We don't have to be afraid of it. We don't have to shy away from it. We don't have to blame anybody else for it. We can own our own stuff, and imagine for a moment what that would be like if everybody owned their own stuff instead of trying to shift blame on other people. It would
Yeah,
be amazing.
yeah, because that's the problem is that people like, if you're a person that's like, you know, channeling this really dark thing, and then you say, "Oh, I'm not responsible for that." And I'm
Mm,
kind of like, I tell like some of my musicians, but if you're channeling this like narcissistic, dark, really dark thing,
yes.
then look at your crowd. Your crowd's doing the same thing,
Mhm.
right? And if you're channeling like a Stevie Wonder, really elevation type of thing, like love is in need of love today, right?
Mhm.
You're channeling like a Bob Marley, really elevation thing. You see a different vibe,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then you get the artist and say, "Well, I'm not responsible for that." I say, "Are you not really?" Because it seems like you are. Because it seems like if you channel it and you are the epicenter of it, you kind of bring it around. It's like that person,
Mhm.
like you bring that to you,
Mhm.
and
That's
then you
it.
don't take responsibility when it's like, so you have to kind of understand. And some people kind of like are not don't understand what they're doing.
Yes,
or
that's
maybe they
true.
do
That
and
is
they don't
true.
take ownership for it. So they think it's not, it's just this, and they don't see like the holistic like cause and effect. So well, I can
Yeah.
just do this, and it doesn't have an effect. Like words have an effect. If you say certain words, you can trigger certain behavior, like yelling fire in the crowded room. They go, I'm not responsible for that. Oh, yes, you are. The law says you are. So if it's like you could say, well, it's just words. It's like, well, those are frequencies too. They mean things. Like
Yeah.
people have to understand that, like, oh, I'm not responsible for anything I do because just whatever, it just happened. And some things are unconscious, but you have to kind of think about like how much unconscious stuff do you do that actually is rooted in something.
Yeah. And it's kind of like when someone's willing to do something like go to therapy or take a course like one of the courses that I'm offering, my boundaries courses and stuff, and just educating, because that's one of the things that's one reason why I wanted to offer different courses, like a self-study and then a group course where somebody's with me in the group, but also they could do therapy. So it's kind of like people are different levels of wanting to learn. Some people want to just kind of do it on their own. They don't really want to be involved in a group. They just kind of want to, let me just watch the videos on my own. Let me do the application questions on my own. I just want to just be kind of by myself. I'm just kind of wading slow into this.
Mm-hmm.
And other people want to be part of a small group where they can get to know and connect with other people and learn about it. Other people want to jump full in and do therapy. But regardless of what somebody chooses, the educating and learning how what you're doing is impacting yourself and impacting the world around you, so that you can see that you do have power, you do have control, and you do not have to own actually what they choose to do if they want to blame you for it. Like, let's say if you said something to someone and, well, let me give you an example. Let's say that you interacted with someone, let's say you did, and come to find out you're interacting with a man whose wife just cheated on him with a guy who looked just like you.
Oh, wow.
Now you had no control over that, but he's really angry with you. You're trying to be nice to him. You're trying to, get some kind of relationship going, and you just can't. He just seems to hate you. He won't even look at you. He's just being really gruff and really kind of snarky and critical. And then he acts like he holds a grudge. You can't seem to get anything going. So that's why it's good to understand boundaries there, because you are only in charge of what you're doing. You're reviewing your behavior. Think, okay, I was nice. I interacted. I made good eye contact. I used a pleasant tone of voice. I had good thoughts about this man. Meanwhile, what happened with his wife cheating on him with the man who looked just like you? You had no control over that.
Yeah.
You didn't cause that.
No.
You can't control that. And clearly you can't cure it. So when you have boundaries, you let that go. You don't take it upon yourself like it's your fault that man doesn't like you. You don't go home and like wring your hands going, what's wrong? What have I done? How come he doesn't like me? He's holding a grudge. He doesn't like, you don't do that, because that's his. And for some reason, unbeknownst to you, but there is a reason, he doesn't like you.
You can't win everybody. You can't win everybody over.
No.
Some people want to be such people pleasers to the extent that it's like it's not healthy for themselves, because not everybody's gonna like you.
No.
Growing
And that's
up in America,
okay.
you grew up in America, I realized that. I say that all the time. So it's like, yeah, I like you got your own hang up. It's like, fine. There's always that. My whole thing is they don't bring it into my space for no reason. Right.
Right.
So like fine, you can believe whatever you want, but like have your boundary. Like, don't come to my yard.
Yeah, because when they're in your yard, you have some say so there.
Yeah. So that's like the boundary where sometimes people don't realize that you walk in a room and then you get to feel like, well, these people suddenly they don't like me. Kind of walking in a room. I live in New Hampshire, so you can get the idea. It's like why? It's like, I don't know why, but I feel valued. And I'm like, okay, well, I gotta live with that. But it's like, I'm not gonna try to people please everybody. It's like, fine, that's where your camp is. That's what you want.
Right.
And so as long as you don't get too personal in my space, that's fine. It's like, just leave it alone. I'm not gonna go, what's your problem? Like, don't cause an issue if you don't need to. And, a lot of things I see escalations, all the time. I was an Uber for many
Oh,
years paying for my gear.
yeah.
And sometimes you get somebody in the car and they immediately want to get into some kind of confrontational conversation. And I
Hmm.
would just not let it happen because they soon they get in the car and they want to say something and it's like, oh, fine. It's like, I'm not going to engage on that.
Hmm.
And then I heard stories with other Ubers that say, oh, I got in trouble. It's like, well, why did you take the bait? Don't take
Exactly.
the bait. It's like, we're just a taxi. Why you take the bait? If we can have a cool conversation, that's great. And that was part of the job is to get the 5-star, have a cool conversation. But some people, they didn't want to do it. It's like,
Hmm.
fine. If you don't want to do it, then I'm not going to engage. It's like, fine. You just be quiet and sit there, and that's fine. I don't have to engage if that's the way you want to be. But you kind of got to feel like you could feel the vibe for certain
Yes.
people. Like driving as many people as I did for 5 years, I start to got to get the feel for people. He's like, well, this is going to be an interesting ride. This is going to be a boring ride.
Yeah. But you're thinking about yards. Imagine if you had a neighbor who came over and you put a lot of effort into planting your flowers and your shrubs and your mulch, and you're real proud of your yard, and your neighbor came over and pulled your flowers up out of your yard because he didn't like them. Well, it's like, that's not what
What are you doing?
if you don't like these flowers, don't plant them in your yard. You can't come jerk them out of mine. But see, that's what sometimes people do. They try to tell us, you can't think that, you can't feel that, you can't do that because I don't like it. And
Mhm.
that's a boundary issue. Now, there's another type of
Yes.
boundary issue where if you go, say you got a neighbor that likes to throw wild parties on Friday nights and it creates this big mess. And so Saturday morning, you go over there and you clean up his yard because you're trying to do a random act of kindness, right? He's going to have a hangover. His
Mm.
yard's a mess. So you're like, I'm going to go clean up his yard. Well, let's say you do that for 8 weeks in a row. And then he comes out of his house that 9 week and you haven't cleaned up his yard. Then he's going to be mad because he's going to be like, why aren't you cleaning up my yard? Because we trained him that we were going to go clean up his yard, which didn't belong to us. That's another type of boundary breach where we take the natural consequences of someone else's choices and we take them on ourselves, and we
Mm.
train them that we're going to do that. And so then they expect us to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot about boundaries, is that we train people what to expect from us. So if someone is expecting us to act a certain kind of way, if they've been around us a while, then that means we've trained them to expect that.
Mm. Yeah, that becomes a bad situation. It's kind of like
Mhm.
a codependent thing because like you go and now you're kind of subjecting yourself to them and they're thinking that you're their kind of cleanup person.
Yeah,
And,
because
and
you've trained
you
them that you
signed
were
up for
going
it, but now they
to.
think, yeah,
It's
then
like,
now
it's
they
not
think
your
you are.
stuff. Yep. And but then that
Yeah.
person will say, "My neighbor expects me to clean his yard." And I'm like, "Okay, well, why does your neighbor expect that?" And
Because you
then,
did
like,
it.
with my patient, it will say, "Well, I guess I went over there and cleaned up the yard." And I said, "That's interesting. How long did you do that?" "Oh, about 8 weeks." I'm like, "So you went over and cleaned up his mess for 8 weeks in a row. Now he expects you to clean it up and you're surprised?"
Yeah.
It's like, we have to own that.
Yeah, because you might want the neighborhood to look a certain way and you get embarrassed if the neighborhood looks bad, but he didn't care about that.
Right.
And it's really not your responsibility. And then maybe there's other things you could do because like I don't he's bringing the neighborhood down. Maybe I need to do something and about that from some other perspective, but not take it on myself. If
Mhm.
there's a homeowners association, like, hey, like what's going on with this? Do it
Yeah,
from a
exactly.
standpoint that like it's the right way to do it.
Right.
Um, yeah, a lot of people, they don't think about things in a holistic way, or they kind of a reactive way. Like I always like to be proactive. I like to plan when I can, but then I like you take the moments as they come. So yeah, if you're gonna be an artist, you try to plan, right? You try to have a project you plan, but then you don't say, well, if I then something unplanned happens, and it's like throws the whole thing off. It's like you kind of expect there's gonna be this random stuff, and but you have an overall idea, like, oh, well, I'm gonna get this done in 3 months,
Yeah.
because that's when I want to target it. And so you try to, have like this idea of understanding what's around, you know, to a certain extent. But
Well, and
it's always a
you're
kind of
better able to do
case
that
by
if
case.
you like your schedule and your plan. You're much better able to do that if you have healthy boundaries and you don't have toxic people that are sucking your energy from you and telling you you should be doing this, you should be over here doing that. And so instead of sticking to your plan, you're doing what other people are telling you that you should do because you don't feel like you can tell them no. And then your plan goes right out the window. So it's like setting healthy boundaries helps creative people to have
Yeah,
that space to be creative.
yeah, I've run into people that miss all their deadlines because of that kind of scenario. Somebody
Mhm.
comes in off the cuff and then they totally drop everything, and this other person, they drop everything, and they keep on trying to people please, and they
Yep.
totally miss all the things that were important to them because
Yes.
they're trying to please everybody else.
Yes.
And then they become like,
100%.
then they kind of get a reputation of being unreliable because they keep on missing all the stuff. And then they're thinking like, well, how come people think of me this way? Well, because you keep on missing all the goalposts
That's it.
because you're
Because you
getting
are this
like
way.
knocked off the trail.
And it's like, and why are you being this way? Because this person wants this from you and you just go off and do it. Why do you do that when you had your plan and you had what you wanted to accomplish and yet you're just going off sideways because this other person made you feel some kind of way? It's like, no, that's a personal boundary and it's also a boundary with someone else that needs to be set.
I think it's really important for people to look at what you're talking about with the boundaries, because I think a lot of people could probably find places in their lives where they could do better
Mhm.
with where their boundaries are. Because like
Yes.
given certain people or certain situations, you might feel you have boundaries with this individual or this group, but then don't have it with this other group.
Hmm.
And so like everybody could probably find like shades of gray where they're on this scale where they think they're doing better than they are.
Oh, 100%. And basically, if you ask yourself, do I have trouble saying no to someone or a situation? There's a lot of different questions you can ask yourself, but that's a helpful one. That's a really kind of a basic, easy to remember question. If you're in a situation with yourself or with someone else and you find yourself needing or wanting to say no, but you feel like you can't, you feel like you're scared to say no, you feel like you can't quite get the word out,
Mm,
more than likely that is a boundary issue.
definitely. So
Mhm.
I'm glad that we had this conversation today. It's like the time always goes by quicker than I think. We hit our hour mark, but want everybody to check out your website, danaskaggs.com. Again, if people go there, they can they can they fill out questionnaires and they can start to approach like what services they want from
Yeah,
you
there's a
kind of help.
quiz. Yeah, there's a quiz they can take to just find out if they do have boundary issues in their life, and it gives them a score. And there's also tidbits of things they can kind of put into place in their life. And there's also a possibility to take self-study courses, a shorter one and a longer one, and also a group course that I'll be starting one. I think it's starting the end of this month, the 29th of June. And there's, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there might be 2 or 3 slots left in that first group course. But there'll
Awesome.
be more courses starting later in the year.
It's great, that we have this tool of podcasting to reach out to people. I've been taking advantage of it since 2016, and it just keeps on getting bigger and bigger. And I'm just glad that we talked. And I think that my audience, no matter what you do in your life, I think you can listen to this conversation, and you could, I think you can learn from the boundary discussions we've had, and kind of do that initial questioning that you were saying, like, and determine like maybe you need to check this out. So again, this will be clickable on the fully published podcast. We are on almost every platform our podcast can be listened to and watched. So we'll have that to your audience, a landing page later today where they can figure out where they want to watch or listen, based on where they like to watch or listen. But thank you
Okay.
again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Here in New Hampshire, we're we're just a little overcast today, but maybe I'll still do my walk in the woods.
Sounds good.
Bye-bye.
See ya.